increase jobs. So in a sense, we have to look at it in terms of how do we resuscitate our exports. One of the points that has been very, very adequately talked about, and even ourselves in the National Treasury, is that we have to develop, protect, and regulate markets. Because once markets are not well regulated, they are not well governed, they collapse. They collapse with Kenyans' investments. And there is no more investment in that sector. It means that poverty hits very hard. For some of you, you have written papers and articles on that. Look at the coffee sector. Look at the sugar sector. Look at the cotton sector, subsector. Wherever markets have collapsed because of poor governance, you know poverty has struck, investments have been lost, it has been very difficult to revive. Pyrethrum, okay, all those. That is one of the most important. So when I talk about policies, programs, and interventions, those are the issues that we are talking about. So markets governing is an intervention that is required. Hustler Fund is an intervention because we want to reorganize that market. We want to make sure that people move out of the bondage of, what are they called, Shyrocks. The Shyrock is from the Merchant of Venice. I don't know why they say Shyrock. But it's a bondage of financial distress. We want to make sure that we have some interventions. So when we talk about, we need very strong policies, we need strong programs aimed at targeting different programs. By the way, when we talk about programs, we are also they are targeting programs. We want to target the youth. We want to target those people in the bottom of the pyramid in terms of what they need. That's why the Hustlers Fund is very, very important. So when we start by talking about bottom-up economic transformation agenda, you already know that bottom-up because majority of the Kenyans have been left behind, where markets have failed them, where policies have failed them, where government has not been able to invest in areas that they want, and we want to reverse all that. And those are the issues. I wanted to make those 3 points maybe so that you can have a feel that when budget making is not about taxes. Taxes comes in to say, after saying you're going to do all this, how are you going to finance it? Now,
right, well, CS, maybe one of the things that has generated a lot of conversations is looking at the amount of this budget that is going towards recurring expenditure versus development. So if you could tell us, are you concerned about that as the National Treasury when we have recurring expenditure consuming close to 70% or more than 70% of the country's budget?
Actually, 3/4 of the budget discussions, if you ask these two guys with me, has been just that. How do you balance out? Because, look, many years back, when I was the governor of the central bank, I used to argue that even in times of crisis, make sure that you do not devour the development spending because you limit capacity for future growth. That logic is still there. That's why we are saying those interventions is to protect the development expenditure. Because once you devour development expenditure, it means that you limit yourself in terms of future capacity for growth. That is why we are talking about interventions, to make sure that we safeguard some of these issues. That is why we really need that balance. But we go back to the trilemma. We go back to the trilemma. That is, I don't want to call it trilemma. You know, I just want to say it is a major problem. It is one problem, but with 3 dimensions or with 3 faces, isn't it? We want more revenues to spend. But how do we raise more revenue to spend? It's either through taxes or debt. The second problem, you have a limitation with how much debt you can carry, isn't it? The third one is that since taxes is the only one that is left now in that space, how much taxes can you raise? We also have resistance in terms of taxes. So what we are trying to do, and to answer your question, is that we are moving in a direction where we want to make sure that we have domestic resource mobilization that is amenable to the development space that we want. And we want to make sure that we limit our tax expenditure to build up a revenue base or a tax base, and also reorganize. We are trying to reform all dimensions of taxes to try and see how we can raise revenue. Mostly looking at the hard-to-tax economy, And this is some things that we are going to talk about. So in a sense, we are conscious about that. Half of the work that we do is how do we support development spending? How do we create that balance?
Okay. Buenos dias. My name is Njuguna from KTN News. Two questions. The first one is, you've spoken about policies and a wider approach towards, reforms. It's not just budget, but we can't ignore the impact.
We can't ignore?
We can't ignore the impact of the taxation element to several industries. For example, manufacturing. I mean, we've spoken to manufacturers over the discussion on Matters Finance Bill. Some of them are closing up. They are thinking about relocating. How do we counter that?
There is nothing like closing up or relocating. This is a political agenda. Let me tell you, everywhere you go, we try to balance out policies so that nobody feels disadvantaged. Okay? That is a hearsay that you're talking about. Let me tell you, there is nowhere in Kenya that you have raised taxes to the point where farms can close down. Give me an example. I've been living in this country. I've done most of the policy work in my own individual capacity, and I can tell you I have all those. Don't forget, I would like you to go and read the book that we developed in 2002 when Kenyans were so depressed, and it is restarting and sustaining growth in Kenya. You read that, and you'll tell me what you have said is incorrect. If you read that, there are several chapters, you realize that what you are really saying has no basis. It is the whole issue about policy is to balance policy reforms, to balance programs, and finally to balance interventions. There is no way you can come up with policies that kill even a household or an industry. So let's move away from those points that have no even relevance, because it's not true. Who would want to do that?
For example, East African packaging industries.
That they have their own internal problems, my friend. You know, if you fail to compete in the world today, you cannot survive. Are we together? Let's not start an argument, because I can give you that lecture until cows come home. Huh? Okay?
All right, in closing, sir.
Yeah.
The issue of Lafaka, in regards to revenue collection, there's been arguments when you're pursuing revenue.
Waziri pale akisema you have to compete and if you cannot you will close down.
Kweli.
Kabisa.
Lakini ndo masuala ambayo tutakuwa tunaangalia na wageni wetu hapa ndani ya studio ili waweze kutueleza kunaenda vipi na ukweli upi katika maneno hayo, na ikumbuke kwamba ni wakati mgumu, Wakenya wanapitia wakati mgumu haswa wakati uchumi unazidi kuwakaza kwa sana, na tutakuwa tunaangalia hilo. Na mtazamaji, kwa faida yako tuko na wageni ndani ya studio ambao wamejiunga nasi ili kuweza kuangalia